So for a while, I've really been wanting to make something out of my YouTube channel and follow in the footsteps of some of my favorite creators like Waby Websurf and more specifically The Sphere Hunter and her retrospective series on Resident Evil, but life events always seem to get in the way. Thankfully, with my new gaming PC setup and some free time, I've finally decided to start my first retrospective series on my all-time favorite gaming franchise, Metal Gear. Now, for those unfamiliar, Metal Gear is a stealth action series created by Hideo Kojima. In each game, players control a legendary soldier codenamed Snake, tasked with infiltrating enemy territory to destroy a powerful nuclear launching robot named Metal Gear, acquiring top level weaponry and gadgets along the way, and facing dangerous threats, all set against the backdrop of revolutionary storytelling, stealth gameplay, and a unique style that helps cement Metal Gear's place in both gaming and popular culture. And with the release of Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta Snake Eater on the horizon, the timing just feels right to look back on this series to see what works, what doesn't, and to see how far we've come in the process, starting with Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Before we can start talking about the Metal Gear series proper, we gotta take some time to talk about the brains behind the operation, Hideo Kojima, who, despite facing many setbacks, would go on to become a landmark director in the gaming landscape. Kojima was born on August 21st, 1963, and spent many of his adolescent years watching movies with his father, even being encouraged to stay up nights late to watch them in their entirety. This quickly fostered a love and intrigue in the young boy for the art of film and filmmaking, an idea that would stick with him for life. In his teenage years, Kojima started writing scripts and screenplays, hoping that one day they would be adapted into a full-length feature film, with the hopes of being an acclaimed director one day. However, his fate would soon change when he entered college. See, Kojima spent a lot of his free time playing on the NES, more specifically Super Mario Bros., and this new medium of video games opened his eyes to the possibility of bringing his cinematic ventures to this new space. So, in 1986, Kojima joined the gaming division of a Japanese holding corporation called Konami, hoping to join their Famicom team. Unfortunately, when he did join, he was positioned in the MSX division of the company, the MSX being an Asian-exclusive home computer system that could also play video games. Despite the setback, Kojima pushed on and eventually got to work on his first major project, that being as the assistant designer for the 1986 game Penguin Adventure. Now, despite what you may think, Kojima actually did a lot to contribute to this game's development. He reportedly worked countless hours on the project, contributing ideas that allowed the game to be leaps and bounds ahead of its predecessor. His dedication to the craft, despite not having any prior experience, thankfully didn't go unnoticed, and after Penguin Adventure's success, Konami higher-ups decided to test him even further with these next two projects. The first one, dubbed Lost World, really didn't go anywhere, so it's not that important. However, the same can't be said for the second. In 1987, Kojima was tasked with helping with the development of a game that was struggling to get off the ground. This game was planned to be a military-themed shooter in the same vein of games like Commando or Contra. The thing is, from the start, Kojima understood that a game of that magnitude would be simply out of the question due to the MSX2's limited hardware. So how did he manage to get down around this dilemma? Well, it's simple. He turned to the world of cinema for an answer. More specifically, the 1968 classic The Great Escape, which, to give a brief synopsis, is a World War II movie where a bunch of Allied POWs escape a German prisoner of war camp using stealth and cunning tactics. And as you can imagine, this idea of stealth would pretty much be the blueprint for the first game in the series going forward. However, when this idea was presented to Konami higher-ups for approval, their reaction was less than optimal, simply believing that a game revolving around not shooting the enemy to be a bad idea. Kojima stood by his new radical game design, and after doing some gameplay tweaks and resubmitting for approval, this time it was greenlit for full production, this time under the title Metal Gear. Development of Metal Gear lasted around a year, with Kojima writing and directing, while two very important teams were established to help bring his vision to life. A trio of programmers led by Yukiri Fugui created the basics of what would become the series' stable stealth mechanics. Secondly, lead sound designer Akui Musatani and his team created the game's score and sound effects, enhancing the action even further and incorporating dynamic music that changed with the action, immersing players into the world like never before. At last, on July 13th, 1987, Metal Gear was released on the MSX2, with a slightly different NES port being released a year later. More on that at the end. And just to clarify going forward for this review, I'm using the Master Collection version released in 2023 on PS5 for Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2, as well as their NES counterparts. The year is 1995, and the Western world is alarmed by the presence of a newly discovered militaristic rogue state called Outer Heaven in southern Africa. Making matters worse, they also discovered that this state is possibly armed with weapons of mass destruction. So the US military tasked a special forces group called Foxhound to investigate the threat. Foxhound's commander, Big Boss, sends its most highly capable soldier, Frank Yeager, codenamed Grey Fox, to infiltrate the state to see what's going on. But soon Grey Fox goes MIA, leading to Big Boss sending in his newest recruit, Solid Snake, not only to find Grey Fox, but also to put a stop to Outer Heaven and any nuclear weapon potential it may have. Snake's mission goes pretty well at first, as he quickly locates Grey Fox, setting him free, but not before Grey Fox tells him a devastating secret. It turns out the rumors behind Outer Heaven's nuclear capabilities were far worse than first thought. The country is actually armed with a new bipedal tank called Metal Gear, which is so powerful it can launch a nuclear strike anywhere on the globe. And just like that, Snake is given his new mission to destroy Metal Gear before it becomes operational. To do this though, Snake must contact the person who designed Metal Gear, Dr. Drago Petrovich Modnar, a Russian robotic scientist who was kidnapped and forced to work on the bipedal tank. It's also here that we find out that Modnar's daughter was kidnapped by Outer Heaven mercenaries as a way of insurance. The crazy thing about this is that Modnar will refuse to tell you how to destroy Metal Gear until you rescue his daughter, which goes to show his priorities are definitely in order. Anyways, as Snake progresses deeper and deeper on Outer Heaven, things continue to get more and more unhinged. While rescuing Modnar's daughter and other Outer Heaven hostages, he's constantly finding himself in extremely dangerous situations, alongside having to defeat Outer Heaven mercenaries trying to thwart his operation. And on top of everything else, his support team, mostly consisting of Big Boss, isn't making things easier, as throughout the adventure he constantly gives Snake pretty much suicide missions, to the point where he gives the series its first fourth-wall breaking joke, where he straight up orders us to turn off the console. Interesting. So finally, Snake rescues Modnar's daughter and he spills the beans on how to destroy Metal Gear. This led to a very lackluster boss fight where he just simply placed C4 at the mech's feet to blow it up. But afterwards is where things start to get interesting, and we get the first major twist of the series. Turns out the founder/commander of Outer Heaven is Big Boss himself, who created the country as a way to give soldiers a new life and purpose away from their respective governments, as they were seen as pawns, and the whole point of Metal Gear was to act as a deterrent to prevent invasion from the West. This also explained Big Boss's behavior throughout the game, believing that a new recruit such as Snake wouldn't be capable of finishing a mission such as this, preventing the West from getting any information about Outer Heaven. But Snake defied these expectations and soon the two engaged in a gunfight, resulting in Big Boss's death. Snake soon escapes with Outer Heaven being bombed to hell behind him thanks to NATO, thus ending the original Metal Gear. And I'm gonna be honest with you, overall this is a pretty good narrative, especially for 1987 standards. Even the biggest RPGs at the time could match this type of storytelling, with themes of war, betrayal, and the overall threat of nuclear destruction. Metal Gear 1's story was, at least at the time, a one-of-a-kind adventure that showed Kojima pretty much was hitting the ground running in terms of game directing. And even though the plot isn't as complex as later titles, for the first game in the series, without a job, it gets the job done establishing the blueprint for the rest of the series going forward. Getting into the game itself, Metal Gear is an 8-bit stealth action adventure game with a top-down perspective. To complete your mission and destroy Metal Gear, you must sneak through Outer Heaven whilst avoiding various forms of security like enemy sentries, security cameras, and traps. Stealth is the core mechanic here, and to put it simply, it's fairly straightforward for the most part. Enemies can only see in a straight line, which means you can often walk past them without much trouble. However, if you do end up getting caught, this is when Metal Gear's trademark alert phase happens, as when you're spotted, the scenario turns into a flight or fight situation, where the player can either retreat to get out of sight, or try to kill every enemy on screen to get things back to normal. While both options are viable, I found retreating to be the better choice in most cases. This is largely because moving to the next screen often cancels the chase instantly, whereas trying to stay and fight often wastes resources and can be downright tedious. So on the surface, things seem pretty simple, but as I quickly found out, this game is anything but that. This game features an unholy amount of trial and error gameplay, and a lot of which I could purely chalk up to the fact that this game being a product of its time. The two major issues I have with this game is the issue of navigation and the game's unclear instructions, and I mention them both because both problems often have issues where they all overlap with each other in many ways. Starting off with the issue of navigation. To my knowledge, there is no map and nothing to sufficiently guide you through. Even the people who help out both on the radio and in the base that you eventually rescue, most of the time just give out vague hints on what to do and where to go, even if they have a clue to give at all. I got so lost in the first 5 minutes of playing the game that I had to look up a walkthrough, and this is how it works. Outer Heaven is comprised of 3 buildings, all of which need to be explored in their entirety to complete the game. Each building houses a series of rooms and corridors that need to be accessed via card key system that allows you to procure on-site equipment and weapons, not only for self-defense, but also for finding other card keys to progress further in the game. The main drawback is the organization of these keys, to put it blankly, is a mess. The keys don't follow the modern series pattern of later keys opening earlier doors, nor do they stack. Instead, the player will collect up to 8 individual card keys that will open their specific door. And because none of the doors in the game are properly labeled, it turns into a guessing game of stopping and constantly pausing and equipping each card key to see which one works on said door. And this is only ever compounded by the fact that there's a lot of backtracking in this game. Even worse is when you're caught in situations where you need to move fast. Case in point, the gas-filled rooms. If you've ever played this game or watched online reviews, this is one of the main complaints people always talk about. And yeah, I agree, it's horrible. There's also a ranking system tied to the hostage rescues. After Snake rescues a certain number of hostages, his rank increases, granting him more health and more ammo capacity. While simple in concept, the system isn't explained really well when it becomes really crucial. If your rank isn't high enough at a certain point of the story, you'll be forced to go back and rescue more hostages before you can continue. In terms of graphics, there's really nothing I can really complain about. The use of grays, dark blues, and browns effectively creates the atmosphere of a cold, depressive military installation where danger lurks around every corner. It really emphasizes the life or death stakes of your mission. As for the music, it's mostly fine, though I did get pretty tired of hearing the theme of Tara play on loop for about 90% of the game. I appreciate how the soundtrack changes dynamically though based on the situation, a very unique technique unheard of at the time. Overall, Metal Gear isn't perfect, but it laid the foundation for the rest of the series going forward with its themes of war, betrayal, and the nuclear threat. It may not be as complex as later entries, but it's a unique and engaging adventure for its time. The game was a massive success, getting lots of respectable praise for its gameplay and premise. Moreover, it showed Konami Kojima's growing potential as a game director, and allowed him to move up the ranks in the company, giving him permission to work on something new, while Konami would continue to monitor the growing potential of the new Metal Gear brand with an NES version released in 1988. Throughout the late 80s and into the early 90s, Kojima began working on his new project, aiming to more fully develop his storytelling skills. This time, he created a Blade Runner-inspired graphic novel game, which would later become known as Snatcher, released for the MSX2 in December 1988. Snatcher was yet another hit, once again thanks to Kojima's distinctive storytelling, and is now considered a cult classic. However, Kojima's success was soon overshadowed by other events, primarily the development and release of an NES port of the original Metal Gear, and by the time Snatcher was released, Konami had already launched a sequel dubbed Snake's Revenge. Initially blindsided by the situation, Kojima found new inspiration after a conversation on a train ride with one of the programmers for Snake's Revenge, who was pretty surprised that he wasn't involved in the project. That very night, Kojima began drafting plans for the true Metal Gear follow-up. Development for the game was quickly approved, and the team dedicated themselves to refining many aspects of the original. Key improvements included an updated visual design and enhanced gameplay mechanics. On July 20th, 1990, Konami released Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake for the MSX2. This time, the story jumps ahead to the year of 1999, 4 years after the events of the original game, now known as the Outer Heaven Uprising in the timeline. Following the end of the Cold War, the world is healing and working towards complete denuclearization to ensure global peace. Unfortunately, this prosperity doesn't last long and new problems soon arise. By the late 1990s, global oil supplies begin to dwindle, causing widespread panic. A potential solution appears when Czech scientist Dr. Kio Marv develops a new energy source called Oilix to resolve the crisis. However, on his way to prevent this invasion to the world, Dr. Marv is kidnapped by agents working for another rogue state, this time in Central Asia called Zanzibar Land. This group seeks to use the new resource to establish a total monopoly on oil while also threatening the world with nuclear weapons to maintain control. So, with no other options, Foxhound, this time being led by Serious New Colonel Roy Campbell, requests Solid Snake to leave retirement once again to combat the threat. With the mission clearing his head, Snake begins his initial infiltration, with his first objective being to locate Dr. Marv. Whilst doing this, Snake comes into contact with Holly White, a CIA agent doubling as a journalist. Holly is the first of many teammates that Snake can contact over radio to aid him in his journey, with the others being Master Miller, a survival consultant and breaker of the fourth wall, and another serious newcomer, George Kostler, a man who gives tips about the enemies of Zanzibar Land, and Gustava Hefner, the bodyguard of Dr. Marv. This by itself is already an improvement, as the last game, I really didn't need to use the radio all that much besides Big Boss, and there wasn't really anything of use there. This time though, Snake's team for the most part do a way better job helping him this time around. After tracing the origin of Dr. Marv's transmitter, Snake is ambushed by one of Zanzibar Land's elite mercenaries who also serve as the game's bosses. After a tense battle, the soldier, codenamed Black Ninja, is revealed to be Kyle Schneider, the leader of the Outer Heaven Resistance from the first game. Now, I didn't touch upon this before, but during the Outer Heaven Uprising, there were actually Resistance fighters fighting alongside Snake, feeding him info here and there to ensure Metal Gear's destruction and gain their freedom. Unfortunately, for a lot of them, that freedom never came, as because of the NATO airstrike, thousands of innocent fighters, war orphans, and hostages were killed off, and many of the survivors, including Schneider himself, were abandoned with nowhere to turn. That was until a powerful, mysterious figure saved them from their horrid conditions, not only to give them a new home, but also a new purpose as soldiers in his army. Now, this part along with Schneider's death is already impactful, as it just goes to show that the events in the original game were not as black and white as things may have been seen, and there were definitely some huge unforeseen consequences to the actions of all the major players in those events. In his final moments and feeling no animosity towards Snake, he reveals how to find the real Dr. Marv, which involves Snake tailing a green beret through the jungle, which ends in a clearing with a small warehouse. Upon entry, Snake soon hears what appears to be random knocking being emitted from the other side of the wall. Snake soon realizes that this is tap codes, an old Vietnam War trick used by US soldiers to discreetly deliver messages. The person on the other side is Dr. Drago Petrovich Modnar, yes, the same Modnar who's the developer of Metal Gear from the first game. And the following expedition dump, he drops two major bombshells. Number one is that he and Dr. Marv were both kidnapped to help develop the new incarnation of Metal Gear, codenamed Metal Gear D. And number two is that Big Boss is in fact somehow still alive and well, and he is the founder/commander of Zanzibar Land. Now, before we move on, I think this would be the appropriate time to talk about this. Before 2015, it was commonly accepted in the Metal Gear canon that the Big Boss in both of these games were the same. But after the release of Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, Kojima actually retconned the story, revealing the Big Boss you killed in the first game was actually Venom Snake from The Phantom Pain, a body double created by Big Boss as part of a greater deception. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not too sure how other people feel about this, and you can tell me in the comment section below, but I really don't mind it as it kind of makes sense and rounds out everything pretty nicely, so whatever. And for those of you who are curious, I will talk about this more in detail when we get to the review of The Phantom Pain, so stick around for that. Madnar urges Snake to quickly find Dr. Marv before his failing health catches up with him. After battling through two intense boss fights, one of which was involved taking down a Hind helicopter of all things, Snake reaches his next objective, that tower building. Just as Snake enters the area, he receives a call from Holly, who's in trouble and needs his help. In exchange for his assistance, she promises to provide him with vital information about Dr. Marv's location. After an incredibly frustrating diversion involving Holly's situation, Snake finally gets Dr. Marv's radio frequency, only to discover that the good doctor doesn't speak a lick of English. Luckily, Dr. Marv's bodyguard, the aforementioned Gustave Hefner, speaks English, and after they make contact with the doctor, the trio head north towards the end of the base through the sewer system. During a brief break, one of the game's most somber moments unfolds. As they rest, Gustave and Snake engage in quiet conversation, opening up about their lives, both marked by a tragedy and loss. Gustave reveals the harsh reality of her past, her struggles, shattered dreams, and the family she once hoped for, only to have it torn apart by the circumstances she found herself in. Snake, deeply empathizing with her, opens up about his own tragic past and attempts to comfort her, offering a rare moment of connection between them amidst the chaos. However, events soon take a cruel turn. As they resume their trek, the trio comes across a large ravine that separates both sides of the base. The only way to cross is a fragile suspension bridge which can only support one person at a time. Dr. Marv is allowed to cross first, but when it's Gustave's turn, this happens. The bridge is destroyed in an explosion, leaving Gustave mortally wounded. The missile explosion was fired from the new model of Metal Gear, piloted by none other than Gray Fox, Snake's mentor and best friend, and yet another crewing character from the original game. After sending two guards to kidnap Dr. Marv and a very vile warning, Fox warns Snake to abandon his mission or he'll be forced to kill him as well. But as we all know, that can't happen. In her final moments, Gustave thanks Snake for all of his kindness, and as a final act of gratitude, she hands Snake her brooch, a key item that will aid him later in the mission. Snake, now more determined than ever, finds a way to cross the gap, and after defeating some bosses, he finally reconnects with Dr. Marv, who sadly is down dead upon arrival. In a series of story twists and turns, Snake finds out that Dr. Madnar wasn't really being entirely truthful about his intentions here in Zanzibar land, and he eventually spills the beans that he wasn't forced here against his will, but was really working with Zanzibar land on the new Metal Gear and revenge against those in America who shunned his scientific work and had Dr. Marv killed on purpose to get all the glory. He also explains that it was he who contacted Gray Fox about the trio's whereabouts, leading to Gustava's death. It even tries to kill Snake as well to try to figure out where Dr. Marv hid the secrets for oil licks. Thankfully, Madnar gets his just desserts, meeting a fitting end after a brutal confrontation. Snake, now with the oil lick document safely in his possession, prepares to leave, but not before Madnar reveals the new Metal Gear's critical weakness. He advises Snake to target the new legs, where the armor is the thinnest and most vulnerable. A trapdoor activates, leading Snake into a small room with 4 rooms, 3 of which contain a bunch of ammunition and rations. At first you're not too sure why these are here, but when you enter the northern room, you will soon understand why. Snake once again battles the new Metal Gear and is once again victorious. Things soon turn fast and furious though, as the resulting explosion sets his gear on fire, and while recovering, Gray Fox steals the Oilex documents to escape. Snake quickly recovers and chases Gray Fox, and Nick confronts him one last time in a minefield, resulting in a fistfight between the former comrades, ultimately leading to a Snake victory. With his dying breath, Fox tells Snake how Big Boss saved him and many others after the events of the first game, and basically saying that even though he was only good at fighting, at least he fought for what he believed in. Snake, having no ill will towards his former friend, assures Gray Fox that he'll soon be with Gustava, who is revealed to be his late wife. Fox is down, but Big Boss is all that remains. Before their big fight, Big Boss pretty much vents to Snake on why he does what he does. He reveals that both Outer Heaven and Zanzibar land was never about chaos, it was about giving soldiers like himself a purpose outside of the control of governments. After being used as a pawn in global politics, Big Boss created Outer Heaven and Zanzibar land as a sanctuary where soldiers could live with dignity and purpose, free from exploitation, while continuing to be themselves in times of peace when they were no longer needed. However, over time his views became a lot more radical, believing that in order to ensure their survival, they needed an ultimate weapon to not only defend themselves, but to expand their reach. Snake, just wanting to finally put all this behind him, confronts Big Boss one last time, incinerating him with a makeshift flamethrower, leaving him to die. Snake then links up with Holly, with them escaping into the sunset via helicopter, thus ending Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Honestly, I'm at a loss for words. This story is straight up masterful for a 16-bit game, with a huge step up from the first game, with a deeper plot, twists and turns around every corner, complex characters with differing motivations, and non-stop action as well as its improved presentation. Metal Gear 2's plot shows that Kojima was just getting started when it comes to storytelling in the gaming landscape, and truly bringing gaming one step closer to being on par with the film industry. But can this high praise also be given to the gameplay? Well, somewhat. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake plays very similar to that of the original game, but thankfully does come with some quality of life updates to gameplay and mechanics, most importantly the stealth. This time stealth is actually highly advised, as the guards are no longer the mindless obstacles that they were before. They've been upgraded with enhanced hearing and vision, meaning they can spot Snake from multiple directions and even hear him when he walks on certain surfaces. Despite that, the upgrades and stuff also apply to you as well. Snake has been given new abilities and tactics to even the playing field. For the first time in the series, Snake can crawl, allowing him to take advantage of blind spots under tables or any enemy's vision, in addition to the new ability of being able to knock on walls to grab guards' attention for various uses. Nevertheless, the biggest feature Metal Gear 2 introduced was the radar, which will become the Soliton radar system in later games. Essentially, it acts as a map that sits in the top right corner and tracks the location of not only Snake, but enemy personnel. This is a fantastic mechanic, as alongside the other forms of staying out of sight, stuff in this game is not only more attractive, requiring more planning and tactical foresight, but also never gets too boring, keeping you on your toes. Getting caught in Metal Gear 2 and escaping the resulting alert phase, it's much more difficult this time around, especially in the early stages of the game. When the alert phase is triggered, the radar is jammed and the player is instantly swarmed by enemies. Just like last time, you can either stay and fight or more strategically run and hide. Successfully hiding triggers the evasion phase, where you must remain out of sight until the alarm is called off. When I first started playing Metal Gear 2, my mind was still stuck in Metal Gear 1 logic, so it took me a while to adjust to the new mechanics. Eventually, I did get the hang of it, but I'd be lying if I say it wasn't frustrating at times. The heightened difficulty and smarter enemy AI makes these moments more intense, but they also add to the challenge and satisfaction of successfully regaining stealth. The hostage and rank mechanics have been completely removed. This time, Snake gets more health and upgrades to ammo capacity from defeating bosses, which also have seen improvements. Most of them just require you to study their attack patterns to sniff out weaknesses, which is also a very welcome change. The graphics have been redefined to be more detailed and are generally much easier on the eyes. Everything feels more distinct and colorful, and there are so many small details that I love noticing, like how you can physically see the guards turning their heads to survey the area. Furthermore, I really appreciate the variety in this game, with a much larger number of environments to explore. This variety helps make a particular issue, which I'll explain later on, a bit less frustrating. In the music department, Metal Gear 2 once again knocks the original out of the ballpark, with more variation and music tracks, a lot of which I actually really enjoyed. The standout one in particular was the opening theme called The Theme of Solid Snake, which, believe me or not, was actually a song that I was addicted to at one point just because of how catchy the beat is. So far, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake feels like a worthy sequel to the original. It even fixes some more of the frustrations from the first game, such as the card key situation by introducing master keys that cut down on time spent in the inventory. However, while Metal Gear 2 reaches many high highs, it also hits some low lows. Unfortunately, a lot of this can be attributed to the fact that the game carries over the cryptic game design choices from the first game. Just like with Metal Gear 1, I had to use a walkthrough to beat this game, because when I didn't, one of two things happened. One is that I would spend a lot of my time just walking around being lost, or two is when I tried to figure things out myself, I would often mess up and die, causing me to lose lots of progress. The worst offender in this situation is the deadly swamp area, where you have to follow a hidden path, otherwise you'll drown and die. One time I crossed it successfully, then defeated a boss on the other side, only to die on the return trip, losing lots of progress. And that's another thing about Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake that pisses me off. It's just the over-reliance on backtracking in general. Sometimes completing one objective requires walking over the same stretch of land many times, which gets quickly dull. To be honest though, Metal Gear 2 is just an okay game in my book. There are so many aspects of this game that still hold up pretty well, and while I didn't exactly have a stellar time playing it, I can still appreciate its place not only in Metal Gear history, but video game history as a whole. And honestly, I'm just pretty happy to say that I finally finished both of these games. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to spend some time talking about the numerous ports for both games that have been released over the years, and ultimately the best way to experience them in 2025. Now, when discussing this topic, it's almost impossible to ignore the elephant in the room, the NES ports. I'll cut straight to the chase because I don't want to spend too much time talking about these things, but to put it simply, Metal Gear's success on the MSX led to Konami to create a North American exclusive version of both games, Metal Gear for the NES and Snake's Revenge. To give a Cliff Notes version of their quality, they're very poor. Both games deviate significantly from Kojima's original vision, and more often than not, especially in the case of Snake's Revenge, they don't even feel like Metal Gear games. Honestly, they come across as blatant cash grabs. Their infamy is so widespread that even online popular video game personalities like the Angry Video Game Nerd have famously ripped them apart for their abysmal quality. Now, as for the original games, Western gamers wouldn't see official ports of Metal Gear 1 and 2 until 2006, when they were bundled with Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. These versions remain largely intact from the originals, with the obvious exceptions of an English translation and updated character art. And since then, these versions of Metal Gear 1 and 2 have been the same in every future collection they've appeared in, whether it be the HD collection on PS3 and Xbox 360, the PS3 exclusive Legacy collection, and finally the 2023 Master Collection. Notably, the Master Collection marks the first time you can purchase these games separately from Metal Gear Solid 3, making them more accessible than ever. And they're available on a wide range of platforms from PS5 to PS4, the Xbox consoles, Nintendo Switch, and PC. And due to that fact, as well as nice emulation and the cool art you can have on both sides, I say the Master Collection version is the best way to play the games nowadays. Hell, they even come with ports of the NES games if you want to fancy them as well. Although I have to admit the HD Collection aren't too shabby either. And with that, my time with Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake comes to an end. And while it was a very frustrating, almost rage-inducing experience, I have to say I still recommend playing these games, especially to other die-hard Metal Gear fans that haven't experienced them yet. And if there's one piece of advice I can give to you after walking away from this review, is that with these things, I advise that you have a high amount of patience. But in the end, it does pay off with adventuring through some of the best storytelling of the 8-bit and 16-bit era. But now that I've finally jumped over that hurdle, these things are only going to get better. Next up, we're jumping into the original PlayStation and talking about my favorite game of all time and my personal inspiration, Metal Gear Solid. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.